Headliner Nation, we have a ton to talk about today. No fancy intro, no draft guide promotions. It's amazing. Buy it. It's down below. To be 100% honest with everybody, I screwed up the spreadsheet used to develop this video, and all the work that Taylor and Devin did in the background got completely wiped out early this morning because I had to redo everything after recording. So I had to redo the spreadsheet. Now I'm re-recording, and we've got a ton to talk about, and I don't want this video to take 45 minutes because Taylor or Devin might show up at my house and I will regret that. Let's go ahead and dive into it. Today we're talking about wide receiver efficiency. I've already done the volume video. You can find a link to that down below if you've missed it. But now we're going to be taking a look at volume and where the big difference is, who are the biggest risers and biggest fallers. And the first of 9 categories to talk about is going to be yards per target. If I had to bet, when I said yards per target, Jameson Williams was not the first player that came to mind, but I bet now that you're looking at it and thinking about it, Jameson Williams makes a lot of sense. He is a guy that last year was not super steady, but you know the big plays were literally a pass away every single game. So seeing Jameson Williams this high is no shock. And guess what? He's going to be pretty high throughout this video. But then you take a look at guys like A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Nico Collins, Ja'Marr Chase, Brian Thomas Jr. Those probably don't shock you all that much either. Ladd McConkey might shock you quite a bit, being at number 3 overall in terms of yards per target. And that's really good for his value moving forward as well, because I think when a lot of people look at Ladd McConkey, you don't think of him as a big play type of receiver. He is a guy that's going to work out of the slot. But if he is seeing that many yards per target working out of the slot and to the outside, that's really good for his fantasy value because he is being utilized excellently. Now, they're going to be bringing in some guys that are going to play on the outside a little bit differently than what Ladd McConkey will. So maybe those yards per target drop a little bit, but as we talk about yards per reception and yards after the catch per reception, those could end up being just as good. Now, let's go to the bottom of the list for a minute. Wan'Dale Robinson is no shock. Keenan Allen, probably no shock as well. Even DJ Moore, that's a little bit of a shock for me. A guy like DJ Moore, Garrett Wilson, Malik Neighbors, why are they so low when they are premier NFL wide receiver talents? Well, it's the quarterback situation, and it's the offense as a whole. Now, there's going to be some differences with all these guys. DJ Moore still has Caleb Williams. However, he has Ben Johnson now as head coach. Garrett Wilson, he's going to have Justin Fields instead. How will that look? Malik Neighbors, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, Jackson Dart, they're all better than what they had last year, especially when it comes to yards per target. If you got a guy like Russ or Jameis Winston throwing the ball, Malik Neighbors is going to see a huge jump in yards per target as well. When you take a look at a guy like Xavier Worthy, though, we saw the big playability in the Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl, when those big plays happened, was basically over at that point. But it is shocking to me, a guy with the speed of Xavier Worthy does not have more yards per target, at least halfway up this list, because it doesn't feel like they're utilizing his speed the way they should. Now, that could change this year, and a lot's going to depend on Rashee Rice. Obviously, they're going to have a guy like Marquise Brown back. Hopefully, Hollywood is healthy throughout the entire season, and maybe that allowed Xavier Worthy to play that role similar to what Jameson Williams does in Detroit, where he's going to have some boom or bust value, but the big playability is going to be there because Marquise Brown, Rashee Rice, whoever else they're going to be utilizing at wide receiver, Travis Kelce at tight end, they're going to really dominate the middle and intermediate portion of the field, leaving Worthy with some one-on-one opportunities further down the field. Okay, now we're going to jump to yards per reception. And what's the difference between yards per target to yards per reception? Who are some of the biggest risers and biggest fallers when you take a look at the two different categories? Jameson Williams and A.J. Brown, 1 and 2 in yards per target and yards per reception. Both of these guys absolutely outstanding with the big playability. But then your biggest risers. Calvin Ridley, George Pickens, and DK Metcalf ranked 16th, 16th, and 14th in yards per target, all the way up to 3rd, 4th, and 5th in yards per reception. So even though the targets weren't all that great, they were still picking up a decent amount of yards per reception. Now, taking a look at Zay Flowers, Marvin Harrison Jr., kind of the same thing. Going from 12th to 9th for Zay Flowers, going from 30th to 10th for Marvin Harrison Jr. But who were some of the biggest fallers between the two categories? Ja'Marr Chase goes from 6th to 16th, Puka Nacua 9th to 21st, Devontae Smith 8th to 24th, and a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown 15th to 32nd. And you'll see his name pop up at the end of this list when we talk about just the overall average of where these guys finished across the board for efficiency. Amon-Ra St. Brown, yes, the volume is very good, but there's efficiency areas where he's going to be a whole lot better than other areas. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's not one of those big play receivers a majority of the time. Amon-Ra St. Brown, when he catches the football, he's getting a decent amount of yards per target, but there may not be a ton of yards coming after that. And one thing you see with Amon-Ra St. Brown is a lot of times he won't take a hit. He'll go out of bounds. He'll go down where he makes the catch. He'll definitely pick up the yards that he can find afterwards, but he doesn't take a bunch of unnecessary hits that could end up getting him injured, which honestly is a good thing for fantasy owners. The big playability isn't what you would see like a top tier player be, but he scores a ton of touchdowns and he sees a ton of volume. So even though the yards per reception isn't great, it's not anything that worries me either. Yards after the catch per reception. I love looking at this category. What guys are really good values to me? Because they're going to pick up really good second chance yards, which means extra fantasy points. Jameson Williams at the top of the list once again. 1, 1, and 1 to begin the video. It shows just how good he was last year. And the Lions are talking up an even bigger season coming for him in 2025. And there's an account over on Twitter called the Coach Speak Index. And I'm not super familiar with it, but I have seen it from time to time pop up. And one thing they do is they took a look at like press conferences, media days, stuff like that from coaches. And then they go back and they see when a coach says something, how often does it come true? Dan Campbell has one of the highest Coach Speak indexes of all of the head coaches, meaning that when he says something, a majority of the time, it's true. He's not BSing anybody in the media. When he says something, listen, because typically he's a man of his word, which means when we listen to him, when he tells us that Jameson Williams could be in for a huge 2025, he's probably telling the truth. And if he is, and Jameson Williams is in for an even bigger year, these numbers could be absolutely insane this coming season. Number one, though, he's got to keep his mouth shut. Way too many times last season. Stupid penalties because he likes to talk a little bit more than what he should. But number two, does he go from being last year a guy that was great in best ball, but a definite headache in just plain redraft leagues where you had to choose on a weekly basis who was going in your lineup and who wasn't? Because there would be weeks where he'd have a huge week, and then there would be weeks where he would completely disappear. And when that happens, it's really hard to consistently try and play him. The biggest thing for me this season isn't the ceiling. We know the ceiling is there. It's the floor. If he's really in for a big 2025, I would rather have a better floor than a better ceiling throughout the season. And I'll go back and touch on another name real quick too, Xavier Worthy. I mentioned him a couple of minutes ago in yards per target and how low it was. But yards after the catch per reception, this is what I love to see here. Him being up with a guy like Jameson Williams, Brian Thomas Jr., Zay Flowers, Ja'Marr Chase, being able to pick up yards after the catch is big for that type of a big play receiver, and it goes to show that he can utilize his speed. So if we see a change in the way that he's utilized this year, like we talked about in the last couple of categories, where we start to see more of those deep plays with him, and he still averages quite a few yards after the catch per reception. Xavier Worthy could be a huge breakout candidate this year as well. Khalil Shakir, I love what he does from the slot with his yards after the catch per reception. Is his ceiling as high as Amon-Ra St. Brown? No, it's not, because he doesn't score as many touchdowns. But with plays like this after the catch, you could start to see, especially if his volume goes up this season, Khalil Shakir could start having a floor very close to what Amon-Ra St. Brown does as well. And if that happens, Khalil Shakir could easily be a wide receiver 2 this season. At the bottom of the list for yards after the catch per reception, there's a few bigger names that we might want to see a little bit more from. Courtland Sutton, great volume this year, but when we get to the end of the video, you're going to see that the efficiency just wasn't what we had hoped for. Marvin Harrison Jr., he is a guy that we would like to see him get much better after the catch. He's got to be stronger though, and we've done videos about that this offseason, about we want to see him play the game a lot stronger than what he did last year. Mike Evans, he's been very typically low in this area. For all the years I've done these videos, Mike Evans typically is pretty low in these areas because a lot of time when he catches those deep balls down the field, he's fighting that one-on-one, one-on-two type of coverage, and he's not really making a ton of plays. Plus, he catches a lot of balls in the end zone as well. T. Higgins would like to see more yards after the catch per reception here as well. He could also fall into that category with Mike Evans, where because he's catching some balls like in the end zone or he's facing double coverage, he's not picking up the type of yards we would like, but hopefully this year he's not seeing a ton of double coverage. Even a guy like Drake London would love to see a little bit more big playability out of him in between the 20s and not necessarily when we're getting closer to the end zone. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, we talked about him a little bit already as well. All right, let's take a look at drop rate now. And drops were a new category this year for the volume video. And I saw some people talking about drops not always being the wide receiver's fault and things of that nature. So let's take a look at drop rate instead of just overall volume of drops, because another thing that got brought up was the more targets you have, of course, the more drops you're going to have. But what about just overall drop rate? Where then we take a look at how many drops did you have per target. So when we take a look at drop rate, A.J. Brown and Jakobi Meyers, 0 drops last season. That is huge, especially for people who want to invest in A.J. Brown, but maybe you're worried about it because he just didn't have the type of season that you're used to last year, whether it be because of the injury or the fact that they're just running the ball a whole lot more. A.J. Brown, we'll talk about him more at the end of this video. He's definitely a guy we should still be drafting though. But then you got, Amon-Ra St. Brown. 1 drop last season. Come on, the guy is fantastic. Demario Douglas was all the way up here. Even Marvin Harrison Jr., for as much flack as I gave Marvin Harrison Jr. this offseason in terms of just needing to be better on the field, he held onto the football last year when he was supposed to, and that's what we want to see. But let's talk about guys with the biggest drop rates. George Pickens, Calvin Ridley, Courtland Sutton, Davante Adams. These are guys that are utilized in a big play fashion. And these guys have got to be better when it comes to catching the football. Because a guy like Davante Adams, Calvin Ridley, even George Pickens didn't really score all that high in terms of overall volume. Now, Courtland Sutton was 7th in our volume video. Davante Adams was 11th, but Calvin Ridley was 27th and George Pickens was 37th. So not only were they not getting a ton of volume, but they were dropping a ton of passes as well. George Pickens is going to have to step up this season. New role with the Dallas Cowboys as the wide receiver 2 there. If he's getting one-on-one opportunities, he better be catching that football. Calvin Ridley, he's going to have a better quarterback situation this year. Same thing goes for him. If he's getting one-on-one opportunities down the field, he better be catching the football. Contested catch rate is one of the reasons why Rome Odunze could be a big breakout candidate this year. Because even if the volume doesn't increase significantly, it's those one-on-one opportunities or double team opportunities down the field where if Rome Odunze is very strong at the point of the catch and traffic doesn't bother him, he's going to be able to come down with those deep balls. And that's where Rome Odunze hopefully gets to be a lot better. To me, looking at the Bears offense, and I've mentioned this already, DJ Moore fits the Amon-Ra St. Brown type of profile. where Romo Dunze is going to be more of the Jameson Williams type role in this offense for Ben Johnson, where he's going to have some big games because of his big playability, and other times he might disappear just because there are so many mouths to feed. Terry McLaurin, even Jakobi Meyers being this high is kind of shocking. Jakobi Meyers is not really looked at as that type of wide receiver, but with a new quarterback in Geno Smith, a better run game there as well with Genti in the backfield, you got to wonder if Jakobi Meyers may not be a highlight reel spectacular fantasy player to own this year, but he could end up being really, really consistent. And sometimes that is just as good. Amon-Ra St. Brown, we know he is great over the middle of the field. Mike Evans has always been great contested catch. Juwan Jennings, seeing him this high, you got to wonder if he fits into that type of role for the San Francisco 49ers, if maybe Brandon Ayuk isn't all that healthy. But we know Brock Purdy loved looking to Juwan Jennings last year, but who's going to be healthy around them? That's going to be the biggest question mark for Jennings. Ladd McConkey, A.J. Brown, Nico Collins. I don't think Nico Collins ever gets enough love in these efficiency videos, even though last year and this year we look at the efficiency overall, and even 2 years ago before his big breakout, we looked at the efficiency, and that was one of the reasons why we pointed towards Nico Collins potentially seeing a bigger role and bigger fantasy numbers going forward. So he's always been good from an efficiency standpoint. Guys that need to be better with contested catches, because these are guys that are going to be big play receivers down the field. DK Metcalf and George Pickens. DK Metcalf being this low is kind of insane for me. You had Geno Smith last year in Seattle, who isn't awful. You also had tons of wide receivers around you with Jackson Smith-Njigba and also Tyler Lockett. So the question becomes, DK Metcalf, you probably weren't being double teamed all that often, so why are we not coming down with these balls? Now, as of yesterday, Aaron Rodgers headed to Pittsburgh, so the quarterback situation, hopefully, Aaron Rodgers, for as bad as he's been, he's got to be better than Mason Rudolph at this point. But, I mean, you're going to have a potential better situation now in Pittsburgh. DK, the problem is you don't have the type of weapons around you that you did in Seattle. So if you're already not that great at contested catch for whatever reason last year, you better be ready to get at it this season, because there's going to be some times where you're absolutely going to have to battle double coverage. George Pickens, the good news for George Pickens is he's going to see more one-on-one coverage this year. CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, both of those guys are going to help draw some attention away from George Pickens to give him better one-on-one coverage. But if he does find himself in that contested catch type of play where he needs to go up and get the football, he's got to get a lot better as well. Red zone target percentage. What guys have really great shots of coming away with a touchdown every single week because they're being looked at in the red zone? Jordan Addison being this high is really good for his flex playability moving forward, and you're going to even see it at the end of this video and where he ranks overall. Being the number 2 behind Justin Jefferson isn't all that bad. The question is he the number 2 behind Justin Jefferson, or is he the number 3 behind Jefferson and Hockenson? And with J.J. McCarthy at quarterback this season, we could see a very dynamic pass catching workload for a lot of these players. But there's going to be concerns. I love J.J. McCarthy. Obviously, I do. I'm a Michigan fan, but in all of my evaluations of him, he is an NFL caliber quarterback with a lot of big play potential, which is good for Jordan Addison. Even if he's not getting a ton of volume, if he's getting a lot of looks in the red zone, those touchdowns would definitely help offset any type of volume he may lose to Jefferson and TJ Hockenson. A guy like Romo Dunze, red zone targets, very good for him. Cortland Sutton as well, Drake London, Justin Jefferson, even a guy like Tyreek Hill, for as bad as he was last year, still consistently looked at in the red zone. Terry McLaurin as well. George Pickens is way up here. Now, when you take a look at the bottom of the category, a guy like Ladd McConkey with only 14.5% red zone target percentage. When we get into the red zone with the Los Angeles Chargers, the tight ends and the running backs become very valuable. And then you got a guy like Quentin Johnson, Mike Williams, guys that are going to be kind of those bigger type of targets. Ladd McConkey isn't really being looked at in the red zone. It's that big playability from him where he's going to have to score outside of the 20, where that's where kind of that drop in overall ceiling could go from, because the volume's really, really good, which is going to definitely help his floor. But if he's not being looked at in the red zone more often and touchdown potential isn't better, then that ceiling does start to tick down a little bit and we don't love it. And the same thing could be said for a guy like Khalil Shakir. We mentioned him earlier as a solid wide receiver 2 candidate, especially if you're in like a PPR league. But if you're in a half PPR league or even a standard league, he starts to take more and more of a hit. And if he's not scoring a ton of touchdowns, his wide receiver 2 area is more of a ceiling than a floor. And then you would take a look at his floor of being more as a wide receiver 3 or flex play on a weekly basis, which isn't awful. You just don't want to overdraft him then. Let's take a peek at yards per route run. So for every route you ran last season, how many yards did you average? Again, it's routes run. It's not targets, not receptions. So you could have been running a route, didn't even get targeted, and then it's still being taken into the equation. So how many yards are being picked up for every route you ran last season? I don't think it's any shock that Puka Nacua is not only at the top of this list, but he is significantly higher than A.J. Brown. 3.56 yards per route run last season compared to A.J. Brown's 2.99. Now, Puka Nacua, obviously last season, ran less routes because he saw some time injured. So did A.J. Brown. So did Nico Collins. So your top 3 players here are all guys that missed a decent amount of time, so they ran less routes. But then right behind them, Justin Jefferson, Brian Thomas Jr., Jamar Chase, Mike Evans, Ladd McConkey, Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, even a Juwan Jennings, a Zay Flowers, and Josh Downs. Josh Downs right in the middle of this. Also a guy that did have some issues being banged up last season, but for the amount of routes that he was running, he was doing a decent job of picking up yards. And you got to wonder if he's going to be looked at this year the same way he was last season. Tyler Warren has been added. You still have some big play ability on the outside with Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell. And then, of course, Michael Pittman is there kind of as that safety blanket out at the X. So Josh Downs is a guy that, yes, he has some more room for growth this season, but it's really hard to figure out what this offense is going to end up looking like. Guys at the bottom of this list that we want to get better, Rome Odunze is definitely there, and we've already talked about him, but Wan'Dale Robinson really rings true. In terms of overall volume last year, he saw a crap load of targets. But that was basically it. He saw a lot of targets. He saw a lot of receptions. He didn't have a lot of receiving yards. He didn't have a lot of touchdowns. And even last year when we were doing our rankings video every single week, there would be times where we would leave Wan'Dale Robinson out and everyone would be like, well, where's Wan'Dale? Like, why isn't he in there? He's such a safe bet. And he really wasn't. He was getting a ton of targets, which is great, but he wasn't doing a whole lot with that. So if you were playing him in the flex every single week, you were getting a guy that was offering you up wide receiver 3 numbers at best. Every once in a while, he might have a big play where he would kind of creep up a little closer to wide receiver 2. But I mean, if you were only in the 2 wide receiver league, you weren't playing Wan'Dale Robinson, and you certainly weren't flexing him over any running backs that you probably owned. So for Wan'Dale Robinson, this is an area where he's got to get better. He's got to pick up more yards. If the targets are still very good for this season and we're still looking at him quite a bit, that's awesome. Hopefully with better quarterback play, that gets better. But he's not a guy that's guaranteed to be a flex play every single week because he just doesn't pick up many yards. Points per snap. Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this category in depth because it's not necessarily the players that I want to talk about, but it's the reason why I included points per snap. Now, you can see all the players listed on the screen, but the reason I like to include points per snap in the efficiency categories is because a lot of times we'll see the arguments, well, this guy is playing a ton of snaps, so you want him on the field in fantasy football. That's not necessarily true. And that's why I like talking about points per snap, because you could play a ton of snaps. And we've seen it with guys in the past who are on the field on a consistent basis. Even at the running back position, they're out there. But they're either A, not being utilized enough, or B, they're just not getting the ball enough. And while being on the field and having a ton of snaps is encouraging, it's not something that directly leads to fantasy points. It leads to opportunity, but it doesn't lead to fantasy points. And that was one of the reasons why I created my dynamic running back rating, which you get an in-depth dive with in the fantasy football draft guide that we offer every single year. 2025 is available and open now. The DRBR will be coming over the next couple of months, but that was one of the reasons why I created that, because there was always this argument about these guys are playing the most snaps, so they have the most potential. And I created the DRBR to basically say that's not true. It's a per touch basis that we're looking at. So when we take a look at snaps and fantasy points per snaps, that means the more snaps you play, the more opportunity you have, yes, to score fantasy points. But points per touch, which we're now going to transition over to, is where you have the best opportunity to actually gain those fantasy points. Fantasy points per touch. This is where you find the high upside ability of all of these players. Generally, the more touchdowns you score, the higher you're going to be in fantasy points per touch. But it does also include just overall volume to those players. But seeing guys like Mike Evans, AJ Brown, Jordan Addison, Terry McLaurin, not very shocking at the top of this list. Marvin Harrison Jr. is the only player this year to be inside the top 10 of fantasy points per touch, but to be outside of tier 1 or 2 at the end of this video for overall score. Marvin Harrison Jr., he's got the potential, man. He's got the potential. Is it the offense? Is it the quarterback? Is it him? I think there's a lot of question marks about Marvin Harrison Jr. There's not going to be any in between with this guy. He's either going to be one of the better fantasy options in football this year and be a guy that we can lock in as a top 24 option, or he's going to have another disappointing season. I really don't see a ton of in-betweens there. The volume needs to be a little bit better, but he needs to be better from an efficiency standpoint everywhere on the field and not just taking advantage of touchdowns. All right, overall efficiency scores. What wide receivers were the most efficiency wide receivers in all of fantasy football last season? A.J. Brown leads the way. A.J. Brown should be another good bet for fantasy this year, even if maybe his ceiling isn't nearly as high as it used to because he lost some volume. But the one thing we know with A.J. Brown, when he does get the volume, he typically does a good job of cashing in with fantasy points. Last year, we just saw a dip in that volume, and he was banged up. Let's get him back to full health the same way with Nico Collins. Nico Collins started off strong last year, got hurt when he came back. Unfortunately, this offense was a mess, and he suffered. But we know, efficiency-wise, he was still one of the better wide receivers last season. Justin Jefferson, Jameson Williams. To see Jameson Williams basically in the realm of names that we see right here was probably not guessed by a lot of people last season. I was one of them, though, that said Jameson Williams' breakout is coming, and it sounds like it could be even better this year. Jameson Williams, from an efficiency standpoint, he's a great best ball draft pick, but we want to see that floor get higher like we talked about earlier. Brian Thomas Jr., to see his name this high, and to be as high as it was in terms of volume, which we'll talk about in a minute here, that's really, really good for his just overall superstar power moving forward. He is a legit top 10 wide receiver. Jamar Chase was obviously inside this top tier here. Mike Evans, Ladd McConkey, and Terry McLaurin. For as much volume as Terry McLaurin got last season, he was still in the top tier of overall efficiency. And even if his volume takes a smidgen of a hit this year, which I don't think it will, efficiency-wise with Deebo Samuel there, he can end up being just as good, if not better. It's good to see Ladd McConkey finish this high as well. It shows a lot of potential for his floor and fantasy output as a whole. We just need more touchdowns out of him. Taking a look at tier 2, Jordan Addison to finish this high, really good for his fantasy outlook as well. I mean, we know Justin Jefferson is the number one target there, but Jordan Addison putting up these type of numbers gives us a lot of hope that he will definitely be the number 2 target over TJ Hawkinson. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he takes a little bit of a fall from what we're talking about in terms of volume to efficiency, but still very good across the board in a lot of different categories. Puka Nacua, obviously we would like to see his efficiency a little bit higher, but he finished quite a bit higher from volume to efficiency anyway, so this was a large jump for him too. T. Higgins, Drake London, both of these guys, a lot of touchdown potential and hopefully a little bit more volume moving forward as well for different reasons. T. Higgins, more volume because he can stay healthy. Drake London, more volume because he has a better quarterback this year. Jauan Jennings to finish this high in efficiency, also really good for his potential fantasy output. With no more Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk possibly being banged up still to begin the season and not at 100% health, Jauan Jennings is a guy that Brock Purdy loved to look at last season. Will he do it once again? Zay Flowers, he started off last year with an insane amount of targets, and it started to disappear as the year went on. Now, Rashad Bateman just signed an extension with Baltimore, and Mark Andrews will be another year older, but you still have Isaiah Likely there, and you're going to be running the football with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. So for Zay Flowers, if the volume from last season is not going to get a ton better than what it was, at least the efficiency still falls within this tier 2 range because it means he still has plenty of fantasy football upside, just like a guy like Devontae Smith. Like Devontae Smith, he's talked about year after year as being one of the better big play wide receivers in all of football. And it's good to see his efficiency here, but he kind of falls into that same area as Jameson Williams, where it's like, yeah, big play potential. He's going to win you some weeks, but there's going to be weeks where he completely disappears. And Devontae Adams, he had a terrible season last year just in terms of the situations that he was in. So for him to even finish inside the second tier of efficiency is quite an accomplishment. All right, let's take a look at the third tier, and then we'll go to the fourth tier after that. But what guys in the third tier do I think have the best opportunity to kind of jump into the second tier or maybe higher next year? Khalil Shakir and CeeDee Lamb are number 1 and number 2 for me. Khalil Shakir hopefully sees a little bit more volume next season, but also maybe sees a little bit more big playability, maybe scores a couple of more touchdowns. Keon Coleman being in his second year may help take some of that pressure off. CeeDee Lamb, a healthy Dak Prescott will go a long way, and having George Pickens on the other side should help him as well, seeing that efficiency jump back up there. I don't think anyone's really giving you a discount on CeeDee Lamb because they're looking at just the name at this point and not looking at kind of the numbers he put up last year. But I think a majority of people are in agreement that last year isn't what we'll probably see from Lamb moving forward. Courtland Sutton really needs to be better in terms of efficiency. There's a lot of good things being said about obviously adding Evan Ingram, a better running back situation potentially this season, and some second year candidates that could end up taking a step forward, and even a third year guy like Marvin Mims. When you take a look at the guys in Denver, there's a possibility that Courtland Sutton loses some volume last season. And again, in terms of volume last season, he finished 7th in my volume video. He is all the way down 17 spots in terms of efficiency. He's going to have to be more efficient next year because if he's not, he's going to lose a ton of fantasy value if he loses a ton of volume. Rome Odunze could take another step in terms of efficiency. That would be great for him considering his volume may not be a ton more. Jackson Smith-Njigba should see a good amount of volume, but it is a little concerning for me that his efficiency was so poor last season, given that there were a lot of weapons around him. So we'll see if he can take another step with similar volume, but better efficiency. Calvin Ridley, definitely would love to see him more efficient. Same thing goes for Tyreek Hill and Malik Neighbors, but one thing about both of these guys is their quarterback situations were terrible last season. So Ridley, Hill, and Neighbors, all of these guys with a better quarterback situation, a healthy Tua for Tyreek Hill, definitely would be way better, and they would be the first ones to take a big jump here, especially Malik Neighbors. Okay, the fourth tier. Let's touch on all these guys super quick and why they finished this low. Cooper Kupp, it was about a lack of explosiveness and injuries. Will he be healthy this year? If he will, definitely could end up being better in terms of efficiency. Garrett Wilson, it was all quarterback play. Does he reconnect with Justin Fields? from their Ohio State days, that would help him. DJ Moore, it's not about Caleb Williams, but about overall offensive game plan that could definitely help out DJ Moore. Jerry Jeudy, improved quarterback play, but who's going to be the quarterback there? And if it's Kenny Pickett, is he really the answer? Xavier Worthy. Talked about him a little bit already. For him, it's really about big playability. We need to see some more big plays from him, and that could happen with other guys around him taking over that intermediate part of the field. Michael Pittman Jr., for me personally, is probably a guy that never ends up being that efficient. It would need to be volume that carries him, and as of right now, we don't know how that looks in Indianapolis. Demario Douglas definitely needs to see more efficiency, and maybe that happens with a better game plan on offense and a second year Drake May. Keenan Allen, free agent, not really worried about him right now, but it's probably not a shock that he hasn't been signed by anybody. Wan'Dale Robinson, we've kind of already talked about him. For him, it's about the yards. The targets and the receptions are great, but he doesn't do a whole lot with that, and because of that, his efficiency and his volume overall were really bad. So let's talk about the overall change from volume to efficiency, and the biggest argument for a lot of people will be the fact, well, the more volume you have, the less efficient you are overall. And while that could end up being true, let's take a look at some of the biggest fallers from the volume to efficiency video. Ja'Marr Chase fell 4 spots, but he was still a tier 1 player in terms of overall efficiency. Terry McLaurin also fell 4 spots, but once again was a tier 1 player in terms of overall efficiency. So even though they fell a little bit with volume, it doesn't matter. A lot of volume, still a lot of efficiency. Same thing could be said in tier 2. Amon-Ra St. Brown was number 1 in volume, finishes in tier 2, has a 10 spot drop. You don't love to see that, but it's also not worst case scenario either, because again, that's a lot of volume. Now, if he was dropping all the way down to tier 3, that would be a big argument. T. Higgins fell 3 spots. He's still in tier 2 for both though. Drake London, he fell 10 spots. We would like to see a little bit more efficiency from Drake London, and that could happen with Michael Penix, but not a big drop either. Now, your highest risers were A.J. Brown and Nico Collins. You could make an argument that because of less volume for them last year, they were more efficient. But the biggest problem is A.J. Brown and Nico Collins have always been ultra efficient. And then Justin Jefferson, tons of volume. He's still here. He was 3rd in volume. He's 3rd here. Your biggest riser in this area, Jameson Williams, Brian Thomas, each went 27, or Jameson Williams went 27 spots, and then 3 spots for Brian Thomas Jr. A lot of efficiency for Jameson Williams, but we already know why that was in his offense. But Brian Thomas, tons of volume. He's up here. So that argument that lots of volume leads to decreased efficiency isn't always the case, because even when you take a look at kind of the middle of the pack here, when you take a look at guys in the 2nd and 3rd tiers, there was 6, 7, 8. There were 8 players in the 2nd and 3rd tier that saw a positive game from volume to efficiency. We saw a ton of guys that fell though, but none of them really finished all that high. So let's take a look at some of the guys that were the biggest fallers in terms of the volume to efficiency video. The biggest fallers this season, and obviously there is going to be some drop from volume to efficiency, but your biggest fallers, Garrett Wilson minus 27 spots and Malik Neighbors minus 22 spots. They were 9 and 6. They fell all the way down in terms of their efficiency, but they had a lot of volume. And if they have the same volume this year but better quarterback play, could we argue that their efficiency will be better as well? So that's one argument I wouldn't be willing to make. What about a guy like Courtland Sutton? He is one that I would be concerned about, he had decent quarterback play last year, but if his efficiency wasn't that great, so if his volume takes a hit, does his efficiency really get all that better? A guy like Drake London, he dropped 10 spots. A guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, he dropped 10 spots, but they were still inside the 2nd tier in terms of overall volume. Overall efficiency. So your biggest fallers last year inside the top 10 are guys, two of them that really they're the biggest followers because they had really, really bad quarterback play. Now, in terms of your guys that had the biggest change, 27 was Jameson Williams. He had a 27 score change. He went up 27 spots from the volume video. Yeah, he doesn't get a ton of he doesn't have a ton of volume to go with it. High efficiency. Does the efficiency fall? We don't know yet because he doesn't have a big workload to look at. Where a guy like AJ Brown, we saw him jump 19 spots from volume, but AJ Brown has always been a high player in terms of efficiency. Same thing with Nico Collins. Nico Collins jumped 16 spots from volume to efficiency. Nico Collins has always been a high finisher in terms of efficiency. So, yes, sometimes you can make the argument that more volume equals less efficiency. But there are guys that give you a ton of volume and a ton of efficiency, and it gives them a really safe floor and a high upside every single week. So the data presented to you here is definitely good to utilize, but we want to make sure that we look at individual circumstances as well, like Malik Nabers and Garrett Wilson. Headliner Nation, hopefully you've enjoyed this video and hopefully it's helping you make a lot of your fantasy football decisions. Hit the like button, subscribe if you're new here. You gotta turn on the bell notification as well. I have been recording for 51 minutes and I promised to make this video shorter and I lied. Hopefully Taylor and Devin don't kill me. If they do, it's been fun, Headliner Nation. I won't see you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.